The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling grounds of Adelaide Cottage as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood at the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. The Victorian cottage, nestled within the private grounds of Windsor Great Park, had been their sanctuary for over 2 years now. What was meant to be their forever home, a place where they could raise their 3 children away from the intense scrutiny of royal life, was beginning to feel more like a beautiful prison. William emerged from his study, his brow furrowed as he scrolled through messages on his phone. The lines around his eyes had deepened in recent months, and Catherine noticed how his shoulders seemed permanently tense these days. As the heir to the throne, he carried the weight of the monarchy's future. But lately, that burden felt heavier than ever. "Any word from the security team?" Catherine asked softly, not wanting to wake the children who were still sleeping upstairs. William shook his head grimly. End of quote. 3 more incidents this week. Someone's been testing the perimeter fencing, and yesterday they found evidence of unauthorized photography equipment in the woods beyond the cottage. He set his phone down on the granite countertop with more force than necessary. "I thought moving here would give us the privacy we needed, but it seems we've only made ourselves more of a target." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Adelaide Cottage had been chosen specifically because it offered a sense of normalcy their children desperately needed. Unlike the grand apartments at Kensington Palace, this 4-bedroom home allowed George, Charlotte, and Louis to experience something closer to an ordinary childhood. They could ride their bicycles in the garden, build tree houses, and invite friends over without the elaborate security protocols that governed their London residence. Catherine moved closer to her husband, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "We knew there would be challenges when we made this decision. The children are thriving here, William. George has never been happier at school. And Charlotte loves having the space to pursue her riding. We can't let fear drive us away from what we've built." But even as she spoke the words, Catherine felt a chill of uncertainty. The past month had brought a series of disturbing developments that had their protection officers increasingly concerned. What started as occasional paparazzi intrusions had escalated into something far more sinister. Drones had been spotted hovering over the property at unusual hours, and there had been multiple attempts to breach the security perimeter. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted their conversation. 9-year-old George appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, wearing his favorite Manchester United pajamas. Despite being third in line to the throne, he remained blissfully unaware of most of the pressures surrounding his family. "Mummy, are we still going to the village fete this afternoon?" George asked, his eyes bright with excitement. "You promised we could enter the 3-legged race, and Charlotte wants to try the cake decorating competition." Catherine and William exchanged a meaningful glance. The local village fete had become an annual tradition for their family, one of the few public events where they could interact with their neighbors, as relatively ordinary residents of the community. But given the recent security concerns, their protection team had strongly advised against attending. "We'll see, darling," Catherine replied, forcing a smile. "Let's have breakfast first and see what the day brings." As George bounded back upstairs to wake his siblings, William pulled Catherine aside. "The security briefing is at 10. Chief Inspector Morrison wants to discuss some new intelligence they've received. From what I understand, it's not just random intrusions anymore. There's evidence of organized surveillance." Catherine's stomach tightened. She had suspected that their recent troubles weren't mere coincidence, but hearing it confirmed made the situation feel suddenly more real and threatening. The delicate balance they had worked so hard to maintain between royal duty and family life was beginning to crumble. Their move to Adelaide Cottage had been a carefully calculated decision, made with input from senior royals, security experts, and child psychologists. After years of living in the fishbowl of Kensington Palace, they had yearned for a place where their children could experience some semblance of normalcy. The cottage, despite being on royal property, felt like a genuine family home rather than an institutional residence. The children had adapted beautifully to their new environment. George had settled into his new school with ease, making friends with children who saw him simply as another classmate rather than a future king. Charlotte had discovered a passion for horseback riding, spending hours at the nearby stables learning to care for the ponies. Louis, still young enough to be largely unaware of his royal status, delighted in exploring the vast gardens and woods that surrounded their home. But now, Their carefully constructed bubble of normalcy was under threat. The very isolation that had made Adelaide Cottage so appealing was also making it vulnerable. Unlike their London residence, which was surrounded by other buildings and constant foot traffic that provided natural camouflage, the cottage stood alone in its pastoral setting, making any unusual activity immediately noticeable. Catherine began preparing breakfast, a ritual that had become increasingly precious to her. In this kitchen, away from the formal dining rooms and staff of their official residences, she could simply be a mother making pancakes for her children. It was a small act of defiance against the forces that seemed determined to strip away every vestige of their private life. Charlotte appeared next, already dressed for the day in riding clothes, her long hair neatly braided. At 8 years old, she possessed a natural confidence that reminded Catherine of her younger self. Unlike George, who sometimes seemed overwhelmed by the expectations placed upon him, Charlotte approached her royal duties with an almost casual acceptance. "Papa, are you coming to watch me ride today?" Charlotte asked, wrapping her arms around William's waist. "Moonlight has been working on jumping, and I think she's ready to show off." William's expression softened as he looked down at his daughter. "I wouldn't miss it, sweetheart, but we might need to adjust our plans slightly today." The disappointment that flickered across Charlotte's face was quickly replaced by understanding. Even at her young age, she had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when royal obligations or security concerns would disrupt their family time. Young Louis appeared last, clutching his beloved stuffed elephant and rubbing his eyes sleepily. At 5 years old, he remained the most carefree of their children, still young enough to be shielded from most of the complexities of royal life. Catherine scooped him up, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair and treasuring these moments of uncomplicated affection. As the family gathered around the breakfast table, Catherine tried to maintain the normal rhythms of their morning routine. She served pancakes while William helped Louis cut his into manageable pieces. George chattered about a science project he was working on, and Charlotte described her plans for the day. To any observer, they appeared to be an ordinary family, starting another ordinary day. But beneath the surface, tension crackled. Catherine could see the way William's jaw tightened when he glanced at his phone, and she noticed how their protection officers seemed more alert than usual as they conducted their morning perimeter checks. The careful normalcy they had fought so hard to establish was under siege. The secure phone in William's study rang, its distinctive tone cutting through the breakfast conversation. He excused himself to answer it, leaving Catherine alone with the children. She watched through the window as 2 additional security vehicles arrived at the cottage's discreet entrance, their presence a stark reminder that their lives were far from ordinary. When William returned 10 minutes later, his expression was grave. He caught Catherine's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly toward the garden door, indicating they needed to speak privately. "Children, why don't you go and get ready for the day?" Catherine suggested. "George, you can help Louis find his outdoor shoes, and Charlotte, make sure you have everything you need for riding." As their children scattered upstairs, Catherine followed William onto the secluded patio that overlooked their private garden. The morning was crisp and clear, with autumn colors beginning to paint the surrounding woodland. Under different circumstances, it would have been a perfect day for the family activities they had planned. "The intelligence suggests we're dealing with more than just overzealous photographers," William said quietly. "There's evidence of systematic surveillance, possibly connected to broader security threats against the royal family. Morrison is recommending we consider temporary relocation while they investigate." Catherine felt her heart sink. The thought of uprooting their children again, just as they had found their rhythm in this peaceful corner of Windsor, was almost unbearable. How temporary are we talking about? Could be weeks, could be months, they don't know yet. William ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Catherine recognized as his way of processing stress. "The cottage will remain under enhanced security during the investigation, but they can't guarantee our safety if we stay." The irony of their situation was not lost on Catherine. They had moved to Adelaide Cottage partly to escape the institutional feel of their other residences, seeking a home where they could live as a family rather than as royal figures. Now, the very qualities that made it feel like home were being threatened by forces beyond their control. "We have to think about what's best for the children," Catherine said, though her heart rebelled against the practical necessity of the statement. "George is finally settled at school, and Charlotte has made such progress with her writing. Lewis barely understands why we have security at all. William moved closer to her, taking her hands in his. Despite everything, this small gesture provided comfort. They had weathered many storms together during their years of marriage. But this felt different. Previous challenges had been external pressures they could face together. This threat was targeting the very foundation of their family life. Maybe we're overreacting, Catherine continued, though she didn't really believe it. Maybe it's just a rough patch and things will settle down again. But William was already shaking his head. The drones aren't random. They're sophisticated, expensive equipment, and whoever is operating them knows our routines. They know when the children walk to the stables, when we typically go for family bike rides, even which rooms we spend the most time in. The violation of their privacy felt almost physical. Catherine had grown up in relative anonymity and had never quite adjusted to the constant scrutiny that came with marrying into the royal family. But this was different from the usual paparazzi attention. This felt predatory, invasive in ways that made her skin crawl. "Have we told the children anything?" she asked. "Not yet. I was hoping we could get through the security briefing first, see what our options really are." William glanced back toward the house, where they could hear their children's voices drifting from upstairs. "But we can't keep this from them much longer. They're smart kids. They've already noticed the increased security presence." Catherine nodded, though the thought of explaining yet another disruption to their lives filled her with dread. George, in particular, had struggled with the constant changes that royal life demanded. He was old enough to understand that his future would be dramatically different from that of his friends, but young enough to still crave stability and routine. The sound of a car approaching interrupted their conversation. Through the trees, they could see Chief Inspector Morrison's vehicle making its way up the private drive. Behind him followed 2 additional cars carrying members of the Royal Protection Unit and what Catherine assumed were intelligence officials. "Whatever happens today, we face it together," William said, squeezing her hands gently. "We've built something beautiful here for our family, and we won't let anyone take that away from us without a fight." Catherine nodded, drawing strength from her husband's resolve. They had overcome obstacles before, and they would find a way through this challenge as well. But as she watched the convoy of official vehicles arriving at their doorstep, she couldn't shake the feeling that their quiet life at Adelaide Cottage was about to change forever. The morning that had started with such simple pleasures was rapidly becoming something else entirely. As they prepared to face the security briefing that would determine their family's immediate future, Catherine took one last look at the peaceful garden where her children played, the stables where Charlotte pursued her passion, and the woodland paths where they had taken countless family walks. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was determined to protect the sense of home and normalcy they had worked so hard to create. But deep in her heart, she feared that the sanctuary they had found at Adelaide Cottage was already slipping away from them, threatened by forces they couldn't see and might not be able to control. The security briefing room had been hastily set up in what was normally William's peaceful study. Maps, photographs, and electronic equipment now covered the mahogany desk where he usually reviewed charitable foundation papers and correspondence. Chief Inspector Morrison, a seasoned protection officer with 23 years of royal security experience, spread aerial photographs of Adelaide Cottage and its surrounding grounds across the conference table that had been brought in for the meeting. Catherine studied the images with growing unease. Red circles marked various points around their property, where unauthorized surveillance equipment had been discovered. Lines traced the movements of unknown individuals who had been tracked, approaching and retreating from their security perimeter. What should have been familiar views of their beloved home now looked like a military target analysis. "The pattern of surveillance suggests professional coordination," Morrison explained, his voice grave but measured. "We're not dealing with amateur photographers or casual royal watchers. The equipment we've recovered is sophisticated, expensive, and deployed with tactical precision." William leaned forward, examining a photograph that showed their children's favorite climbing tree. A small device, barely visible among the branches, had been circled in red ink. "How long has this been going on without our knowledge?" "Based on the forensic analysis, we believe systematic surveillance began approximately 6 weeks ago," Morrison replied. "However, it's possible earlier activities went undetected. The perpetrators have shown remarkable knowledge of our patrol schedules and security protocols. The implications hung heavy in the air. Someone had been watching their family for weeks, possibly months, learning their routines, studying their habits, and documenting their most private moments. Catherine felt a wave of nausea as she realized that bath times, bedtime stories, and quiet family dinners had all potentially been observed and recorded. "What about the children's school?" Catherine asked, her voice tight with concern. "If they know our routines here, what about when George and Charlotte leave the property?" Detective Sergeant Collins, a specialist in threat assessment, consulted her tablet before responding. "We've reviewed security at Lambrook School and found no evidence of surveillance there. However, we're recommending enhanced protection for school runs and any off-site activities until this situation is resolved." William stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the garden where Louis was playing with his nanny under the watchful eye of two protection officers. "This is exactly what we were trying to avoid when we moved here. We wanted our children to have some semblance of a normal childhood, not to live like prisoners in their own home." "Sir, I understand your frustration," Morrison said carefully. "But we have to consider the possibility that this surveillance is preparation for something more serious. The sophistication of the operation suggests resources and planning that go beyond simple privacy invasion." Catherine felt her blood run cold. "Are you saying someone might be planning to harm our family?" "We can't rule it out, ma'am. The level of detailed reconnaissance being conducted is consistent with patterns we've seen in cases involving planned kidnapping attempts or other serious threats against high-profile targets." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the antique clock on William's bookshelf. Catherine found herself focusing on that familiar sound, using it to anchor herself as the implications of Morrison's words sank in. Her children, playing innocently in the garden below, might be in genuine danger. "What are our options?" William asked, his voice steady despite the tension Catherine could see in his shoulders. Morrison opened a thick folder and spread out several documents. "We've identified 3 potential courses of action. First, we could maintain your current residence while implementing maximum security protocols. This would essentially turn Adelaide Cottage into a fortress, with significant restrictions on movement and activities." Catherine shook her head before he could continue. "That would destroy everything we came here to find. The children would be living in a prison." "The second option," Morrison continued, "is temporary relocation to a more secure facility while we conduct a comprehensive investigation and neutralize the threat. This could take several months." "And the third?" William prompted. "Complete relocation to a new primary residence with enhanced security features built into the design. This would be a permanent move, but it would allow you to eventually return to a more normal lifestyle once appropriate safeguards are in place." Catherine felt tears threatening. Each option represented a loss of the life they had carefully built at Adelaide Cottage. The home where Charlotte had taken her first riding lessons, where George had built his elaborate Lego cities, where Louis had learned to ride his bicycle. All of it potentially lost because of faceless threats they couldn't even identify. "Who's behind this?" William asked. "Do we have any leads?" Detective Collins consulted her notes again. "The equipment suggests professional-grade surveillance capabilities, possibly with international connections. We are coordinating with MI5 and international security agencies to identify potential sources. The sophistication indicates either state-level resources or very well-funded private actors." The mention of state-level threats sent a chill through Catherine. She had always known that marrying William meant accepting a certain level of security risk, but she had never imagined that their young children might become targets of international intrigue. "Timeline?" William asked tersely. "We need a decision within 48 hours. Morrison replied. "If you choose to remain at Adelaide Cottage with maximum security, we need to begin implementation immediately. If you opt for relocation, we have several secure facilities prepared for your family's immediate use." Catherine looked around the study that had become William's sanctuary. Books on history, conservation, and leadership lined the shelves. Photos of their family vacations sat on side tables. William's desk held carefully organized stacks of correspondence related to his charitable work. This room, like the rest of the cottage, had become a reflection of their hopes for their family's future. "Can we have some time to discuss this privately?" Catherine asked. "Of course, ma'am. We'll be in the security office if you need us. However, Please remember that every hour we delay increases the potential risk to your family. As the security team filed out, Catherine and William were left alone with the weight of an impossible decision. The photographs and maps scattered across the desk seemed to mock their carefully constructed normalcy. "What do we tell the children?" Catherine asked, sinking into one of the leather chairs by the window. William joined her, reaching for her hand. "The truth, I suppose. As much of it as they can handle." He paused, looking out at their garden where Louis was now chasing butterflies. "George is old enough to understand that sometimes bad people take too much interest in royal families. Charlotte and Louis, we'll have to find gentler ways to explain why their lives might need to change again." Catherine squeezed his hand. "I keep thinking about all the promises we made when we moved here. We told George he wouldn't have to change schools again. We promised Charlotte she could continue with her riding. We said Louis could have a dog once he turned 6. We can keep some of those promises, even if we have to move," William said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The children are resilient. They'll adapt." "Should they have to?" Catherine asked, her frustration finally breaking through her composed exterior. "Should our children have to adapt to constant upheaval because of threats from people we've never met, for reasons we may never understand?" William was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had made different choices. If we had stayed at Kensington Palace, accepted the institutional lifestyle, surrounded ourselves with so much security that no one could ever get close. We'd have different problems," Catherine replied. "Remember how George struggled with the formality there? How Charlotte felt like she couldn't just be a child? We made the right decision moving here, even if it's proving more complicated than we hoped." A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Maria, their housekeeper and one of the few staff members who lived at the cottage, peered around the door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Your Royal Highnesses, but the children are asking when you'll be available to join them outside. Princess Charlotte is particularly excited to show you Moonlight's progress with jumping." Catherine felt her heart break a little more. Their daughter had been working for weeks with the pony, preparing for this demonstration. It seemed cruel that security briefings and threat assessments were taking precedence over such simple family pleasures. "Tell them we'll be out in just a few minutes," William said gently. "And Maria, please don't mention the additional security personnel to the children unless they ask directly." As Maria retreated, Catherine stood and walked to the window. Below, she could see her 3 children playing in the garden that had become their paradise. George was helping Louis navigate the obstacle course they had built together over the summer. Charlotte was leading Moonlight around the paddock, her technique showing marked improvement from months of dedicated practice. "Look at them," Catherine said softly. "They're so happy here. This is the first place that's ever felt like home to all of them." William joined her at the window. "I know, but keeping them safe has to be our priority, even if it means giving up some of their happiness temporarily." "Temporarily," Catherine repeated. "How many times have we told ourselves that royal obligations would only disrupt our family life temporarily?" Before William could respond, Detective Collins appeared in the doorway again. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've just received additional intelligence that may influence your decision." Catherine and William exchanged glances before motioning for her to continue. "We've identified the source of some of the surveillance equipment," Collins continued. "The devices are manufactured exclusively for intelligence agencies and high-end private security firms. They're not available through commercial channels." "Meaning what exactly?" William asked. "Meaning whoever is conducting this surveillance has either government connections or access to resources typically reserved for state-level operations. This raises the threat level significantly." Catherine felt the last vestiges of normalcy slipping away. The cottage that had been their refuge was no longer safe, and the children playing innocently in the garden below were potentially in more danger than any of them had realized. "We need to make a decision," William said quietly. "For their sake, if not for our own." Catherine nodded, though every instinct rebelled against abandoning the home they had worked so hard to create. "I suppose we should go talk to the children. They deserve to hear about this from us, not to be surprised by sudden changes they don't understand." As they prepared to leave the study and face their children with news that would once again uproot their carefully established life, Catherine took one last look at the security photographs spread across William's desk. Somewhere out there, unknown people were watching their family, documenting their movements, and potentially planning something that could threaten everything they held dear. The afternoon sun was still shining brightly in the garden, and their children were still laughing as they played. For a few more precious moments, their world remained intact. But Catherine knew that within hours, everything would change again, and the sanctuary they had found at Adelaide Cottage would become just another memory of a life they had tried and failed to live. The conversation with their children took place in the garden room, a sun-filled space where the family often gathered for informal meals and quiet evening activities. Catherine had chosen this location deliberately, hoping that the familiar surroundings would provide some comfort as they delivered news that would fundamentally alter their children's sense of security. George sat cross-legged on the rug, his science notebook open beside him, still absorbed in sketches of the solar system. Charlotte perched on the edge of the sofa, her riding boots muddy from her afternoon with moonlight, excitement still radiating from her successful jumping session. Louis had claimed his favorite spot in William's lap, clutching his stuffed elephant while sleepily fighting the afternoon nap that his parents knew he desperately needed. "We need to talk to you about some changes that might be happening," William began, his voice carefully measured. Catherine could see him struggling to find the right tone, serious enough to convey importance, but not so grave as to frighten their youngest children. George looked up from his notebook immediately, his expression shifting to one of concern. At 9 years old, he had developed an almost uncanny ability to read the subtle emotional currents in his parents' voices. "Are we moving again?" he asked quietly. The directness of his question caught Catherine off guard. She had prepared gentle explanations and careful euphemisms, but George's intuitive leap to the truth left her momentarily speechless. "We might need to," Catherine admitted, "but only temporarily and only to keep our family safe." Charlotte's face fell. "But what about Moonlight? I can't leave her now, not when she's finally trusting me with the jumps. And what about the Christmas show at the stables? I've been practicing for months." Louis, still drowsy but sensing the shift in mood, tightened his grip on his elephant. "Are the bad people coming?" he asked, his 5-year-old mind immediately connecting change with the vague concept of bad people that occasionally explained why they couldn't do certain activities or visit certain places. William adjusted his hold on Louis, pulling his youngest son closer. "Some people have been watching our house without permission, and that makes it unsafe for us to stay here right now. We need to go somewhere else until the police can make sure those people go away." "Like when we had to leave Kensington Palace?" George asked, his voice small. Catherine's heart ached as she realized that her eldest son was already creating a mental catalog of times their family had been forced to relocate due to circumstances beyond their control. "Similar to that," William acknowledged. "But remember how we found this wonderful house after we left the palace? We'll find another special place to stay while the grown-ups fix the problem here." Charlotte stood abruptly, her riding boots clicking against the hardwood floor as she began pacing. At 8 years old, she possessed a fierce independence that sometimes worried Catherine. "It's not fair," Charlotte declared. "We didn't do anything wrong. Why do we have to leave our home because of what other people are doing?" Catherine exchanged a glance with William. Charlotte's indignation was entirely justified, but there was no satisfactory answer to her question. The arbitrary nature of royal life, the way external forces constantly shaped their personal decisions, was perhaps the most difficult aspect of their position to explain to their children. "You're absolutely right, Charlotte," Catherine said. "It isn't fair. But sometimes grown-ups have to make choices about safety that don't feel fair to anyone involved." "Where would we go?" George asked, closing his notebook and giving his parents his full attention. "Would I have to change schools again?" William hesitated. The security briefing had outlined several options for temporary relocation, but none of them would allow the children to maintain their current routines. Lambrook School, where George and Charlotte had finally found their rhythm, would be too far from any of the secure facilities that had been prepared for the family's use. "We're still working out the details," William said carefully. "But yes, you might need to have lessons at home for a while, or possibly attend a different school temporarily." The weight of disappointment that settled over George's features was almost unbearable for Catherine to witness. Her son had struggled with previous school transitions, and Lambrook had been the first place where he had truly flourished academically and socially. The thought of disrupting his education again felt like a personal failure. "What about my friends?" George continued. Tommy and James and I were going to work on our history project together. We're building a model of a Roman fort, and it's due next month. We'll make sure you can stay in touch with your friends, Catherine promised, though she wasn't sure how that would be possible given the security restrictions that would likely govern their temporary living arrangements. And perhaps your friends could visit you, depending on where we end up staying. Charlotte had stopped pacing and was now staring out the window toward the stables. How long would we be gone? She asked quietly. We don't know yet, William admitted. It could be a few weeks, or it might be longer. The police need time to investigate and make sure it's safe for us to come back. And what if it's never safe? Charlotte asked, turning back to face her parents with an expression far too mature for her 8 years. What if we can never come home? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Catherine realized that her daughter had articulated the fear that she and William had been trying not to acknowledge, that their time at Adelaide Cottage might be permanently over, that the home they had so carefully created might be lost forever. Then we'll make a new home somewhere else, Catherine said finally. Because home isn't really about the building or the place. Home is about our family being together and safe. Louis, who had been unusually quiet during this conversation, suddenly perked up. Can we take my treehouse? He asked seriously. Papa and I worked very hard on it. William's smile was the first genuine expression of warmth Catherine had seen from him all day. We can't take the treehouse with us, buddy, but I promise we'll build an even better one wherever we go next. With a rope swing? Louis pressed. Definitely with a rope swing, William confirmed. George had been thinking quietly throughout this exchange. When he spoke again, his question revealed a sophistication that reminded Catherine how much responsibility their eldest child already carried. Will the same people who are watching us follow us to the new place? William hesitated. It was a perceptive question that cut to the heart of their security dilemma. Moving to a new location would provide temporary safety, but it wouldn't necessarily eliminate the underlying threat that had made Adelaide Cottage unsafe. The new place will be much more secure, William explained. There will be better ways to keep unauthorized people away, and better ways to detect if anyone tries to watch us without permission. Like a castle? Louis asked hopefully. Not exactly like a castle. Catherine laughed, grateful for her youngest son's ability to find wonder even in difficult circumstances, but somewhere very safe. Charlotte had resumed her position on the sofa, but Catherine could see the wheels turning in her daughter's mind. When do we have to decide? Charlotte asked. Soon, William admitted, probably by tomorrow. Can we at least have one more night here? George asked. In our real beds? In our real house? Catherine felt tears threatening again. The simple request, to spend one final night in the rooms that had become their sanctuary, seemed like such a small thing to ask, but even that might not be possible, depending on what the security assessment revealed over the next few hours. We'll try, Catherine promised. But we might need to leave sooner if the police think it's not safe to stay even one more night. The family sat in contemplative silence for several minutes. Outside, the afternoon was fading into early evening, and the grounds of Adelaide Cottage looked particularly beautiful in the golden light. Catherine tried to memorize the view from the garden room, the way the autumn leaves caught the sunlight, the glimpse of the stables where Charlotte had spent so many happy hours, the path through the woods where they had taken countless family walks. I want to pack my own things, Charlotte announced suddenly. If we have to leave, I want to choose what comes with us. Me too, George agreed. And I want to take pictures of my room and the treehouse and the fort we built by the pond. William nodded approvingly. That's a very good idea. It's important to have pictures of places that are special to us. As their children dispersed to begin the heartbreaking process of deciding which possessions were important enough to take with them into an uncertain future, Catherine and William remained in the garden room. Through the window, they could see additional security vehicles arriving at the cottage's entrance, a stark reminder that their family's crisis was rapidly escalating. I keep thinking we should have seen this coming, Catherine said softly. The increased paparazzi attention, the drones, the feeling that we were being watched. Maybe if we had taken action sooner. Don't, William interrupted gently. We can't second-guess every decision we've made. We chose to move here because it was the right thing for our family. The fact that it's become unsafe doesn't mean we made the wrong choice. Catherine leaned against her husband, drawing comfort from his steady presence. I'm terrified of what this will do to the children. George was just starting to feel confident at school. Charlotte has finally found something she's truly passionate about. And Louis, he doesn't even understand why his life has to keep changing. They're stronger than we give them credit for, William replied. They've adapted to challenges before, and they'll adapt to this one too. We just have to make sure we're giving them the support they need. A soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Maria appeared with tea service, her face carefully composed despite the obvious turmoil surrounding the household. I thought you might need some refreshment, she said quietly. And the security officers asked me to let you know they need to speak with you again in about an hour. As Maria set down the tea tray, Catherine noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. The woman had become almost like family during their time at Adelaide Cottage, helping to create the warm domestic atmosphere that had made the house feel like a real home rather than just another royal residence. Maria, Catherine said impulsively, whatever happens, I want you to know how much your care has meant to our family. You've helped make this place special for all of us. Maria's composed expression cracked slightly. It's been an honor to work for your family, Your Royal Highness. I hope whatever comes next brings you the peace and safety you deserve. After Maria left, Catherine and William sat drinking their tea in companionable silence. Upstairs, they could hear their children moving around their rooms, the sounds of drawers opening and closing. Quiet conversations about what to pack and what to leave behind. The normal evening routines of bath time and bedtime stories felt suddenly precious and finite. Tomorrow morning, everything changes again, Catherine said. Yes, William agreed. But we'll face it together, as we always have. As the sun began to set over Adelaide Cottage, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Catherine tried to hold on to the image of their home as it had been during their happiest moments there. She thought of summer evenings when the children had played in the garden until bedtime, of cozy winter afternoons when they had all gathered by the fireplace, of quiet mornings when she and William had shared coffee and watched their children discover new adventures in their outdoor paradise. Those memories would have to be enough to carry them through whatever came next. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new accommodations, new adjustments to routines that had taken years to establish. But tonight, for just a few more hours, they were still a family at home, in the place they had chosen to call their sanctuary. The security briefing that awaited them would likely confirm their worst fears and seal the fate of their life at Adelaide Cottage. But for now, Catherine was content to sit in the garden room with her husband, listening to their children's voices drifting from upstairs, and trying to memorize the feeling of being home. The final security briefing took place at dawn, with fog still clinging to the grounds of Adelaide Cottage like a shroud. Catherine stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint the mist in shades of gold and orange, knowing it might be the last time she witnessed this particular view. Behind her, William sat at the breakfast table reviewing documents that would determine their family's immediate future, his coffee growing cold as he absorbed the gravity of the intelligence reports. Chief Inspector Morrison had arrived at 6:30, accompanied by representatives from MI5 and the Counter-Terrorism Command. The cottage's security office had been transformed into a command center overnight, with additional communication equipment and multiple computer screens, displaying real-time surveillance feeds from around the property. The intelligence has evolved significantly over the past 12 hours, Morrison began, spreading new photographs across the table. We've identified the organization behind the surveillance operation. Catherine turned from the window, her heart racing. After weeks of uncertainty, they were finally going to learn who had been threatening their family's safety and peace of mind. The equipment traces back to a private intelligence firm with connections to several foreign governments, Detective Sergeant Collins explained. They specialize in what they call deep reconnaissance operations against high-value targets. William looked up sharply. Foreign governments? The firm has conducted similar operations against other European royal families, high-ranking politicians, and prominent business leaders, the MI5 representative confirmed. Their methods are sophisticated and their client list is concerning. Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. The idea that their family had become the target of an international intelligence operation was almost surreal. What do they want from us? That's still unclear, Morrison admitted. The surveillance could be preparation for various objectives: kidnapping, blackmail, intelligence gathering for foreign entities, or simply selling information to the highest bidder. The casual mention of kidnapping made Catherine's legs weak. She sank into a chair beside William, trying to process the reality that someone might have been planning to take one of their children. The good news, Collins continued, is that we've identified and neutralized their surveillance network around Adelaide Cottage. We've also traced the individuals involved and are coordinating with international law enforcement to disrupt their operations. The bad news, Morrison said grimly, is that their level of detailed intelligence about your family's routines suggests this operation has been in development for months, possibly longer. They know far too much about your movements, schedules, and security protocols. William set down his coffee cup with deliberate control. What does this mean for our safety going forward? In the short term, immediate relocation is non-negotiable, the MI5 representative said firmly. The cottage has been compromised as a secure location. In the long term, we'll need to completely revise your security protocols and consider more permanent changes to how your family operates. Catherine thought of their children sleeping upstairs, blissfully unaware that their lives were about to change in ways that would affect them for years to come. George had finally fallen asleep in his treehouse fort, insisting on one last night in the outdoor sanctuary he and William had built together. Charlotte had curled up in the stable with moonlight, refusing to come inside until Maria had gently coaxed her back to the house near midnight. Louis had insisted on sleeping with every stuffed animal he owned, as if surrounding himself with familiar objects could somehow prevent the changes he sensed were coming. "Where will we go?" William asked. Morrison opened a tablet and displayed several options. "We have 3 immediate possibilities. Highgrove House can be secured within 24 hours, but it would require significant modifications to meet current threat levels. Balmoral is naturally more isolated and easier to defend, but relocating there would mean completely disrupting the children's education and social connections." "And the third option?" Catherine prompted. "A purpose-built, secure facility that's been prepared for exactly this type of situation," Collins explained. "It's designed to look and feel like a normal family residence, but with state-of-the-art security features integrated into the architecture." Catherine felt a wave of despair. Each option represented a further departure from the normal life they had fought so hard to create for their children. "How long would we need to stay at any of these locations?" "Minimum of 3 months," Morrison replied. "Possibly longer, depending on how the investigation progresses and whether we can fully neutralize the threat." 3 months. Catherine tried to calculate what that would mean for her children's lives. George would miss the remainder of his autumn term at Lambrook School, potentially falling behind in subjects where he had just begun to excel. Charlotte would miss the entire winter riding season, losing months of progress with moonlight and the confidence she had been building. Louis would lose the routine and stability that had helped him flourish during their time at Adelaide Cottage. "What about the cottage itself?" William asked. "Will we be able to return eventually?" "That depends on several factors," the MI5 representative said carefully. "We'll need to conduct a complete security review of the property, implement new defensive measures, and ensure that the threat organization is fully dismantled before we can recommend your return." Catherine heard what he wasn't saying, that they might never be able to return to Adelaide Cottage, that the home they had so carefully created might be lost forever. "The children will need to be told today," Morrison continued. "We're recommending departure within 48 hours to minimize the window of vulnerability." As the security team began packing up their materials, Catherine and William were left alone to contemplate the magnitude of the decision they faced. Outside, the fog was beginning to lift, revealing the grounds of Adelaide Cottage in all their autumn beauty. The gardens where their children had played, the paths where they had taken family walks, the stables where Charlotte had discovered her passion for riding. All of it would soon be just memories. "I need some air," Catherine said abruptly, pushing back from the table. She walked through the garden door onto the terrace, breathing deeply of the crisp morning air that carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from the cottage's chimneys. This terrace had been the scene of so many precious family moments. Birthday celebrations, quiet evening conversations with William, impromptu dance parties with the children during summer evenings. William joined her after a few minutes, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "I know this is the last thing you wanted to hear," he said softly. "I keep thinking about all the promises we broke," Catherine replied, leaning back against his chest. "We told the children they could count on stability here. We promised them a real home where they could grow up normally." "We gave them 2 wonderful years," William countered. 2 years when they could just be children, when they could make friends and pursue interests without constant disruption. That matters, does it, when it all gets taken away again? William turned her to face him. "Yes, it does. George learned to be confident here. Charlotte discovered her love of horses. Louis learned to ride his bike and climb trees and 100 other things that make childhood magical. No one can take those experiences away from them." Catherine knew he was right, but the knowledge did little to ease the ache in her heart. "I just wanted them to have what other children have. A home they could count on, routines they could depend on, a sense that their world was stable and predictable. Maybe that was never realistic for children in their position," William said gently. "Maybe the best we can do is give them love, security within our family unit, and the resilience to handle change when it comes." A sound from upstairs caught their attention. George's voice, probably talking to his brothers as they began to wake up. Soon, Catherine would need to go upstairs and help her children dress for what might be their last day at Adelaide Cottage. She would need to smile and maintain the routines that provided them comfort, even as she dealt with her own grief over what they were losing. "How do we tell them?" Catherine asked. "Together," William replied. "Honestly, but with emphasis on the adventure rather than the loss. George will see through any attempt to sugarcoat the situation, but Charlotte and Louis might be able to focus on the excitement of a new place if we frame it properly." Catherine nodded, though every instinct rebelled against portraying their forced departure as an adventure. "And what about the staff? Maria has been with us since we moved here. The security team, the groundskeepers, they've all become part of our extended family. We'll make sure everyone is taken care of," William assured her. "Some of them might be able to come with us to the new location, depending on the security requirements." As they prepared to go back inside and face the day that would change everything, Catherine took one last long look at the view from their terrace. The morning light was painting the woodland in brilliant colors, and she could see deer grazing in the distant meadow. It was achingly beautiful, and the knowledge that they might never see this particular view again made her heart feel physically heavy. "I love this place," she said simply. "I know," William replied. "So do I. But we'll find another place to love, somewhere our children can continue to grow and thrive." Catherine wanted to believe him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Adelaide Cottage had been their one chance at something approaching normal family life, and that whatever came next would be a pale imitation of what they were leaving behind. The sound of children's voices grew louder upstairs. Charlotte's laugh, Louis's excited chatter, George's more serious tones as he probably tried to organize his younger siblings' morning routines. For a few more hours, they were still a family waking up in their own home, following familiar patterns, surrounded by possessions and spaces that reflected their personalities and preferences. "Come on," William said, taking her hand. "Let's go make breakfast with our children. Whatever else changes, we'll always have mornings together as a family." Catherine allowed herself to be led back inside, where the warmth of the cottage embraced them and the sounds of their children's voices provided a soundtrack of normalcy that would soon be disrupted once again. But for now, for this morning at least, they were still home. As she began preparing breakfast in the kitchen where she had made thousands of meals for her family, Catherine tried to focus on William's words. They would always have mornings together. They would always have each other. The location might change, the circumstances might shift, but the core of their family would remain intact. It would have to be enough to carry them through whatever came next. 6 months later, Catherine stood in the garden of Anmare Hall, watching her children adapt to yet another new environment with the remarkable resilience that never ceased to amaze her. The Norfolk estate, which had served as their weekend retreat for years, had been transformed into their primary residence, with state-of-the-art security features seamlessly integrated into its traditional architecture. George was crouched by the pond, carefully photographing water insects for a nature project his new tutor had assigned. His initial devastation at leaving Lambrook School had gradually given way to appreciation for the personalized education he was receiving at home, though Catherine knew he still missed his friends and the social dynamics of classroom learning. Charlotte was in the paddock with her new pony Starlight, working through jumping exercises with the patience that had characterized her approach to riding since her early days with Moonlight. The transition had been difficult. Leaving her beloved pony behind at Adelaide Cottage had resulted in tears that lasted for weeks, but Charlotte's determination to rebuild her skills with a new horse had impressed everyone, including her riding instructor. Lewis had claimed the enormous oak tree near the house as his personal kingdom, and William had spent weekends building an elaborate tree house that rivaled anything they had created at Adelaide Cottage. The 5-year-old had taken to calling himself King of the Oak Tree, complete with a cardboard crown that he wore during his daily explorations of the extensive grounds. The move to Anmer Hall had been less jarring than Catherine had anticipated, partly because the children had some familiarity with the estate from previous visits, and partly because the security team had worked overtime to make the transition as seamless as possible. The cottage at Windsor remained under investigation, its future uncertain, but life at Anmer Hall had settled into new rhythms that felt surprisingly sustainable. "They're doing well," William observed, joining Catherine on the terrace with 2 cups of tea. He had been working in his study, reviewing correspondence related to his environmental initiatives, but he made a point of taking regular breaks to check on the family's adjustment to their new circumstances. "Better than I expected," Catherine admitted. "I was so worried about how they would handle another major disruption, but they've been incredibly adaptable. George seems happier with the tutoring arrangement than I thought he would be," William noted. His last essay on marine conservation was genuinely impressive. Catherine smiled. Their eldest son had initially resisted the idea of private tutoring, missing the collaborative energy of classroom learning. But his current tutor, Dr. Matthews, had proven adept at creating engaging hands-on learning experiences that catered to George's intellectual curiosity while providing the academic rigor he needed. "Charlotte's riding instructor says she has real potential for competition," Catherine added. "She's been working so hard to prove that changing ponies hasn't set her back." The truth was that Charlotte's fierce determination had, if anything, accelerated her progress. The 8-year-old approached every lesson with an intensity that sometimes worried Catherine, as if she were trying to prove that disruption and change couldn't derail her dreams. And Lewis seems to have claimed the entire estate as his personal playground. William laughed, watching their youngest son swing from a rope William had attached to the oak tree. "I've never seen him more physically active or confident." The past 6 months had not been without challenges. The immediate aftermath of leaving Adelaide Cottage had been particularly difficult for George, who had struggled with nightmares and anxiety about their family's safety. Catherine had spent many nights sitting by his bedside, reassuring him that the new security measures would protect them from the threats that had driven them from their previous home. Charlotte had channeled her upset into her riding, sometimes pushing herself and Starlight harder than was wise. Catherine and William had learned to watch for signs that their daughter was using her equestrian pursuits as a way to avoid processing her emotions about the constant changes in their family life. Louis, perhaps because of his age, had adapted most easily to the transition. His ability to find adventure and joy in new surroundings had provided emotional stability for the entire family during the most difficult weeks of adjustment. The investigation into the surveillance operation at Adelaide Cottage had concluded 2 months earlier with the arrest of several individuals and the dismantling of the intelligence network that had threatened their family. But the experience had fundamentally changed how Catherine and William approached their children's security and privacy. "Morrison called this morning," William said, settling into a chair beside Catherine. "The final security assessment for Adelaide Cottage is complete." Catherine felt her pulse quicken. For months, she had been hoping for news that they could return to the home where they had been so happy. Despite their successful adjustment to Anmer Hall, Adelaide Cottage remained the place where her children had experienced their most carefree moments. "And the cottage can be secured to acceptable standards," William said carefully, "but it would require significant modifications. Enhanced perimeter fencing, additional security buildings, technological upgrades that would fundamentally change the character of the property." Catherine felt her heart sink. The Adelaide Cottage they had loved, with its informal gardens, accessible grounds, and sense of connection to the surrounding community, would cease to exist if the recommended security measures were implemented. So we can't really go back, she said quietly. Not to the life we had there, William confirmed. We could return to a much more secure version of Adelaide Cottage, but it wouldn't be the same experience for the children. Catherine watched Lewis climbing higher in the oak tree, his laughter carrying across the garden as he discovered a new vantage point for surveying his domain. Maybe that's not entirely bad news, she said eventually. William raised an eyebrow. How do you mean? Look at them, Catherine gestured toward their children. George is thriving with personalized attention from his tutor. Charlotte has found a new challenge that's pushing her writing skills to new levels. Louis has more space here than he ever had at Adelaide Cottage. You think we're better off here? Catherine considered the question carefully. I think we've learned that home isn't about the specific building or location. It's about creating spaces where our children feel safe, loved, and free to grow into whoever they're meant to become. It had taken her months to reach this conclusion. The grief over losing Adelaide Cottage had been real and persistent, complicated by her anger at having their choices taken away by faceless threats. But gradually, she had begun to see that their time at Adelaide Cottage had been about more than the place itself. It had been about their commitment to prioritizing their children's well-being over royal protocol. The children have been asking about Adelaide Cottage less frequently, William observed. Charlotte mentioned the other day that she likes having more space for Starlight to run, and George told me yesterday that he appreciates being able to pursue his interests in greater depth without the distractions of classroom social dynamics, Catherine added. The transformation in their family life had been gradual but unmistakable. Without the pressure of daily school runs and social obligations, they had fallen into routines that allowed for more flexibility and spontaneity. Family field trips to nature reserves for George's science studies, impromptu picnics in the estate's meadows, extended writing sessions when Charlotte was making progress with a new skill. What about you? William asked. Are you finding peace with this arrangement? Catherine reflected on the question. I think I've realized that what I really wanted from Adelaide Cottage was time, uninterrupted time with our children while they're still young enough to want our company. We have more of that here, in some ways, than we ever had at the cottage. A shout from the pond interrupted their conversation. George was calling for them to come see something he had discovered among the water plants. Charlotte rode over from the paddock to investigate, and Louis swung down from his tree to join the family gathering. As they walked together toward whatever fascinating discovery George had made, Catherine realized at this moment, all five of them, converging from their separate activities to share in one child's excitement, captured the essence of what she had been hoping to create for their family. It wasn't dependent on a specific location or set of circumstances. It was about their willingness to prioritize these connections above all else. A dragonfly nymph, George announced proudly as they approached the pond. Dr. Matthews said we might find one, but I didn't expect it to be so perfectly preserved. Charlotte leaned over to examine George's discovery. It looks like it's wearing armor, she observed. That's its exoskeleton, George explained with the enthusiasm he reserved for his scientific interests. It protects the nymph while it's growing underwater, before it transforms into a dragonfly. Lewis peered into the container where George had temporarily housed his specimen. Does it hurt when it changes? He asked with 5-year-old concern for the insect's well-being. I don't think so, George replied thoughtfully. I think it probably feels good to finally become what it was meant to be. Catherine and William exchanged a meaningful look over their children's heads. The metaphor wasn't lost on either of them. Sometimes transformation, even when it felt disruptive or unwelcome, ultimately led to something better suited for growth and flourishing. Should we take some pictures before you release it back to the pond? Catherine suggested. As the family gathered around George's nature journal, documenting his discovery with photographs and detailed observations, Catherine felt a deep sense of contentment. This wasn't the life she had originally envisioned for their family, but it was rich with the elements that mattered most: curiosity, connection, shared experiences, and the safety to explore and grow. The threats that had driven them from Adelaide Cottage had been real and serious, but they had also forced Catherine and William to re-examine their priorities and discover new ways of creating the family life they wanted for their children. In the end, the setbacks had led them to something unexpected but genuinely fulfilling. As the afternoon sun began to set over Anmare Hall, painting the Norfolk sky in shades of gold and crimson, Catherine realized that she was no longer mourning what they had lost. Instead, she was grateful for what they had found, a deeper understanding of what truly made their family thrive, and the confidence that they could create home anywhere they chose to build it together. The dragonfly nymph in George's container would eventually emerge from the pond as a completely different creature, transformed by challenges that prepared it for a larger world. Perhaps, Catherine thought, their family's journey would follow a similar pattern, emerging stronger and more resilient from the disruptions that had once seemed so threatening to their happiness. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, as they always had, carrying with them the knowledge that home was not a place but a choice. They made daily to prioritize love, connection, and the precious, fleeting years of their children's childhood.